another episode of Space XBLR. We have a very, very special guest on today, and I'm very happy to introduce you to FRITZ LAUN. So he's an aerospace engineer and amateur astrophotographer in Central Florida. He has been fascinated by the wonders hidden in the sky ever since his father first showed him what the moon looked like through a small telescope. It was at that point that he realized that all of these amazing objects in plain view above us every day, just waiting there to be seen. So he took up astrophotography when he was in high school back in 2005. This was the beginning of the digital camera revolution, but it hadn't yet become affordable to amateur astronomy purposes. So his first images were using black and white film of the moon to get the most details that he could. Imagine that. So one thing led to another, and Fritz quickly became immersed into the world of astrophotography, where he strived to make his next image better than his last. So fast forward to 2019, he built his dream observatory in his backyard and have never looked back. And again, if you want to see these photos of his dream observatory, you of course can find on Instagram. That's Serious Fritz. And of course, the Astrobin link is going to be included in the show notes, so you can go and check it out. His amazing work. So Fritz, personally want to say again, big thank you for coming over today to the show.
Of course, thank you. No, I'm really happy to be here, and I was looking through some of your earlier episodes too, and I was just thinking, wow, this would have been great when I was first starting out with astrophotography. You know, there's just a lot of good stuff that you've collected already, so really happy to be a part of it, and hopefully, you know, give some other people some of my hard lessons learned and experience that I've had.
Here you go. Appreciate it. Thanks for the kind words. Again, it wouldn't be happening because of people just like yourself. So I'm flattered that you're, sparing your, busy time with us today. So
of course.
Because you have a interesting kind of, a lot of people get involved with this with this astrophotography kind of hobby, similar to back to your story when your father kind of showed you how the moon looks like through this kind of small telescope. But was there something prior to that that you kind of, you thought, because now you became aerospace engineer, again, working for a big company, and you've been doing that successfully now. So how did it escalate it from that point, or maybe there was something to that before that you became a, aerospace engineer and now building your own observatory at home? I mean, you're heavily involved in astrophotography right now. So how did that happen?
Yeah. I think the real foundation for all this was actually probably Star Wars when I was little. I remember my dad also took me to that back in the 90s when they had like the remastered or whatever, went to the theater, saw it, and I was just like, whoa, space. And I think that's kind of what, planted that seed. Then of course all this other stuff, and that really got me into the engineering, right? Because Star Wars, all these cool space toys, whoa. And then once I started doing a little bit of astronomy with my dad here and there, I remember too when I first saw like the rings of Saturn through the small little Meade ETX telescope, and I was like, whoa, it just looks fake. This can't be real. I've never seen it before live like that. It was just, it blew my little mind as a child. And I think kind of all that just kept building on itself. I was also fortunate that my public high school had a planetarium, which very random, but that was very cool. And so I started taking astronomy classes in high school. And, they had this cool planetarium, was able to learn all the constellations, all this cool stuff. And I think that really helped me get, kind of immersed in it to begin with. And then from there, I really want to say it's just always been pretty constant interest since, I was in high school. Of course, there were times in my life where didn't have as much time to really get into astrophotography anymore, depending on, college and whatnot, because it is a big endeavor if you're really going out to, take images and everything and trying to get clear nights or go to a dark site. But too, when I was growing up, my dad did have an observatory at our house, but by the time I was old enough to understand what was going on, it was converted to a garden shed. So, okay, a little bit too late for that one, but the observatory I have now, kind of named in that honor, it's called, the name of it is L2, so it's the second Laun Observatory, Laun 2. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's a great story. So, by the way, there's a lot of young people who are getting involved with this, and part of your story, I think, why did it stuck with you? I mean, astrophotography, and now you're became a aerospace engineer, which is, you pursued your career and life, and you surrounded, your life with it, actually. So, I think a
Yeah,
part of that was because of, you said, when your father was kind of heavily still involved, had his own, observatory, kind of slash
right.
shed, in at home.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
but that's fascinating. So, how big of a part was that support from from your parents or your father that
oh,
kind of
yeah.
pursued you that direction?
Yeah, it was definitely big. Both my mom and my dad were very much, behind the whole endeavor. My my poor dad, I would always drag him out to all these dark sites and whatever, and he would, help me get stuff set up, kind of tell me, some of the basics. He was, of course, coming from, you know back in his time it was all film, and again, this is like when CCD and stuff is just starting, and heavily dependent on computers. So that was kind of how we split the gap. There was, he knew the fundamentals of astronomy and I knew the fundamentals of computers, right? And so we would kind of merge what we knew at the time together, and got something working there. But yeah, both my parents were very supportive behind it. I think that was a big driver. And two, back when I was in high school with the astronomy classes and whatnot, I also did just have an awesome astronomy teacher who was really into it, would push the outreach, and he really went the extra mile to kind of get people involved and interested. And I obviously had a big effect on me, and I think just goes back to how important teachers are in our lives growing up, and how much they can do with kind of directing us in our lives or introducing us to this really cool stuff. And I just think I've loved space ever since. So
And that is beautiful. I mean, for you, of course, I'm sure that everything wasn't perfect. You had the ups and downs, those kind of moments, the
oh
down
yeah.
moments, which, it's life, it works that
Yes.
way. But,
Yes.
there's a few things that actually wasn't aligned with you that kind of, pushed you that much, in life and, pursue these things, which is, again, was your parents, was your teachers, and just, having planetarium at school, which was kind of an odd thing as well, to have that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so those kind of moments kind of pushed you, to that direction of astrophotography and aerospace engineering. So, talking about your first equipment again, when you bought it, can you talk about what was your first
Yeah.
equipment and what did you bought it and what did you get from it?
I had the worst beginner setup possible. So let me tell everybody what not to do. I started out with an 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain telescope, an SCT, so 2,000 millimeter focal length. And when I did have my first CCD imager on there, it was a Meade DSi Pro 1. So it's also like a chip the size of like your pinky fingernail. So I'm literally trying to image for the first time on a fork mount with a super tiny imaging sensor, and I'm at 2,000 millimeter focal length, and I have no guiding, and yeah, just the the best setup to get frustration probably. So I really went through everything backwards, but I did eventually, kind of, I got a guide scope on there, figured that out. In that case, I converted the fork mount to a wedge, and so I was able to kind of get a little bit better. And then I figured out, oh, what's a focal reducer? Slap that on there, kind of back out a bit to where I should have been starting in the first place, with like a small refractor. Um, so started with that, got a little bit better. But really, one of the biggest frustrations when starting, though, of course, is just you're constantly setting up, tearing down, setting up, tearing down, and it's really hard to pick up where you left off, or it may have been weeks in between your last imaging session. You don't exactly remember the procedure that got everything to work the first time. But yeah, I definitely started with probably the worst setup as a beginner that you should. I think I was of the mindset, oh, I'm going to get this scope because, I can look at planets, and yeah, sure, I can look at deep space stuff and image all of it with this Schmidt Cassegrain, no problem. But the learning curve is much better when you start out with that low focal length refractor. or just a DSLR lens.
Yeah, yeah. So at that time, so what year are we talking about? What year was that?
So that's about 2005, 2006. Yeah.
So that was I don't know if the YouTube was even around at that time, you know, but
Right. Yeah.
yeah. So how did you get the information? Because you said, you know, okay, from there you kind of became a little
Yeah.
bit of a learning curve. So how did you immerse yourself in?
Yeah. Yeah. Back then it was definitely, you know, Cloudy Nights is a good forum for astrophotography. Still certainly is
Still exists,
today. Yep. And then at the same time too, back then, there was a guy named Chuck, and I forget what his last name is, but really nice gentleman who was running the Meade DSI camera forums. And that was just like, that was where I got all my good information about, you know, like how to guide, what to do for a guide scope, all those sort of things. And that really helped me.
Okay. So what would you recommend for people in the beginning stages when it comes to maybe equipment, and maybe we can give some price points, and of
Yeah,
course we can talk about your current equipment, but
sure.
what would you recommend?
Sure. So I think to start out, I would recommend either going with, you know, maybe you already have a DSLR camera. So in that case, you know, you can go ahead and probably use some of the lenses you already have, do some Milky Way shots, don't even have to be tracked. At that point too, you could get a pretty inexpensive, you know, lightweight mount where you could then track the night sky, you know, with this very low focal length setup. But I think after that point, though, if you want to move up, you know, to the next level, what you're talking about then is kind of that low focal length refractor. So like an Orion ED80, I've had that one for 13 years now, still use it today. I think it's $400-ish or so. And once you start getting into that focal length, which is about the 500 millimeter focal length, there's going to be a lot more targets that open up to you. You know, you're not just looking at these big wide fields of, you know, Orion or just the Milky Way. You can really start to get into it. And so at that point, you can get away too with, you know, throwing on a small guide scope on there. And since you're not so magnified, you can really hide a lot of those initial, you know, guiding errors that you might be getting. You know, maybe you don't have the most perfect alignment, but if you're zoomed out, it's fine. And it's going to allow you to first learn all that other stuff you got to learn about, you know, image processing, image acquisition, and have a lot less heartache because you're actually going to have some usable data that you can then turn into, you know, that very beautiful picture at the end. And so you don't have to have the most expensive, precise, you know, Swiss watch type, you know, mount to start with if you're at that low focal length. So that's what I'd recommend. What I have right now, and again, I've kind of done it backwards, right? I've just now gotten into the wide field imaging. Just a few months ago, I finally got a Red Cat 51, which is 250 millimeter focal length, and it has been really fun because a lot of the most beautiful targets are also some of the most largest in the night sky. So you can really get some of those, you know, jewels that are up there relatively easily. And it just makes it really worthwhile. And you just see these awesome results. So I think going forward to your question about, you know, what I would kind of recommend maybe for, if you knew you were at the point where you're really getting into astrophotography, you kind of gotten past, you know, initial DSLR or holding up, you know, your iPhone or something to like a camera or a telescope, I would look into probably some of the iOptron mounts, some of their lightweight trackers, and then some kind of refractor telescope similar to probably the Red Cat 51 by William Optics. I think it's been a really good lens for me, and really in the end it's kind of a hybrid between a DSLR lens and a telescope, maybe a little more on the telescope side. But I think that is what would set someone up for some good success, a little bit less heartache and frustration, and really, get some images that you could be proud of and share with everybody, right? And that's kind of the end goal a lot of the time. We want to learn a lot, and it's really fun to go through the process and learn everything, and we constantly want to upgrade, of course, too. But I think for a lot of us, the goal is, we want to be able to share somehow these beautiful photos of space to people who, might not know it's even up there, or that just anybody could capture it, from their backyard. So I think that'd be a setup that could do it.
Got it. So personally, I don't know, maybe you can tell me like where you're located. Is it like very heavily light polluted area, or is how it is very?
Yeah, it's about medium. I think it's a Bortle 5. Last time I checked, there's a lot of development, of course, here in Florida, but luckily my backyard butts up to a few hundred acres of wetlands, so just preserved area, which is very nice. A little more mosquitoes, but I'll deal with it. I definitely like the dark skies, but I am in a probably suburban to rural transition area is probably the best way to put it. So kind of in that transition. What's lucky for me though is the city is to my west, and so to the south is completely open where I am, and so to the south is where a lot of those really pretty targets are. Trifid Nebula, all sorts of great summer nebulas, and so I have less light pollution down that way. But I did used to do astrophotography in some of the worst light polluted areas possible. Back when I lived actually in Orlando in an apartment complex, I would still do astrophotography right outside my apartment. I would never leave my setup, but I would do it there. And the secret, of course, there is narrowband imaging, and that's where people can get away with living in that light polluted area, but still get these beautiful deep sky photos that are the same color palette as the Hubble telescope, and people will recognize and just be in awe of, and you can literally do that under, a street light. So I think that's something that can really help for people, who are in those sorts of areas. You're not limited to just the planets or the moon. There really is a whole lot out there, even if you do have light pollution. And one of the ways I fight, the light pollution that I still have to deal with where I am is just by lots and lots and lots of exposures. And that's where, my permanent setup certainly helps out. Even if it's only going to be clear for a few hours during the night, I'm imaging. I can automate it. And before that, it was like I'd get home from work and, typically pretty tired, and then it would take me, an hour and a half to set up everything, how I would want it in the backyard with the tripod and everything. Something usually wouldn't communicate with something, unplugged, plugged in one of the USBs one too many times. And, that it would just be to the point where if I didn't know it was going to be a perfect clear night, I was very like, well, is it really worth setting up or not? Is it worth putting in all the effort? But now with the permanent setup, it's just so much easier. And two, I'm very lucky that now with the observatory, it has a rain sensor. So being in Florida, even if it is a clear night, you never know what's going to pop up overnight with a thunderstorm. So I can sleep well knowing that, it's automatically going to close the shutter and protect everything that's inside if it does sense that raindrop.
Okay. And talking about exposure, so there is actually a website called starizona.com that actually is an exposure calculator. So we can actually use that, and we'll give you ideal subframe exposure time. So I think it could be valuable as well. So, but talking about, there's one of the questions, as I mentioned, we'll be asking a few questions from Instagram here. So one of the people asking about
Sure.
Filters. So what would you prefer? Is it narrowband filters versus all RGB, and what do you prefer?
So I think typically I prefer the LRGB just because from a color standpoint, I think it's, and not all targets, but usually it's the most pleasing to my eyes at least. And that's artist prerogative, right? But a lot of times, and I've just started to do this, is even if you just have a hydrogen alpha filter, so just that narrowband filter, that's going to allow you, and even if you're not in a light polluted area, that's going to allow you to image during a full moon. You know, you don't have to worry about that even at that point. And so you don't have kind of these wasted clear nights, and you can do combinations where you have hydrogen alpha as your luminance channel, and then, you know, red, green, blue as your color. You can do that as well. And so you can then wait until, okay, this night the moon's not out, it's clear, I'll go ahead and get my, you know, regular RGB colors in there, and I can add that to the data I already collected when this, you know, horrible light polluting full moon was out. So I think it's kind of some targets I do think are better in narrowband instead of, you know, LRGB, but I think in what I would recommend for an astrophotographer's kind of toolbox with filters is at a minimum have LRGB and then hydrogen alpha. And I think that is going to get you, you know, 90% of what you need. And then if you do get to the point where, you know, you're able to put more money in it, then grab that oxygen 3 filter, and then you can do bicolor, you know, with HA and O3. Which is great too, because then you only have 2 filters to shoot images with, so you can get a lot more time and exposure, you know, on those 2 filters and capture targets quicker. And a lot of times too, that's going to create a color palette that is fairly similar to LRGB depending on the target. So I think that'd be my recommendation there.
Got it. Here you go, Ian. So that's Ian's question. Ian.astro on Instagram. He asked you that. So you mentioned about your equipment. You mentioned Red Cat 51. So is that what you're currently working with, or maybe you can take us through your personal equipment? What do you have?
Yeah. So right now I've got the Red Cat 51 piggybacked on my GSO RC8. So Ritchie Creighton. So really my main scope is the Ritchie Creighton 8-inch, and on that, those 2 sit on a Losmandy G11G mount. Got that back in 2017. So unfortunately, right before the spring-loaded worm upgrade. So I think I'll eventually send it back to California and get that upgrade. And then with that, the observatory itself, it's a Technical Innovations 6-foot dome, and just happened to be that company is actually in Orlando. So that was great. He just brought it over in his pickup truck.
It wouldn't be strange if it wouldn't be in Orlando, you know, that would be strange.
Yeah, right.
Everything is happening in Orlando.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's see. Oh yeah, and then of course imaging camera. So I am a pretty big ATIC fan. I've got the 383L Plus on there. I've been using it since 2014, and it is just a workhorse with that old Kodak 8300 sensor. I haven't, and maybe that's a whole other thing to talk about in a minute here, the CCD versus CMOS, of course, kind of thing. But then I do have, for the RC8, I've got a Moonlight electronic focuser on there, and then of course an electronic filter wheel that I can, you know, put on either scope. And then I do prefer to guide at this point with off-axis guiding. So initially, when I got the GSO RC8 telescope, it's at about 1600 millimeter focal length, and I initially tried to guide with, you know, just a piggyback guide scope, right? And that's what I'd always done before, and I just could not eliminate flexure. I wasted so many nights, tried, you know, took out the, you know, the rings that had like the rods in them, made actual hard clamshell mount on the guide scope. You know, everything was super solid, and still just would get flexure. And so I finally went to the off-axis guide, or the OAG, and it was I'll be honest, it was painful to set up the first time to get a star to show up in the guide camera, but ever since, it's just one less thing now that I have to worry about with guiding. Is I know I'm not going to have flexure, so I just use OAG. Even if I'm doing with the, you know, the wide field Red Cat, the setup I have now is, you know, I always just have my imaging camera, filter wheel, and the off-axis guider. They're just kind of their own little kind of sub-assembly. And so I literally can just take that between the two telescopes, and the off-axis guider is already parfocal, with the imaging camera. So I don't have to do any more focusing with the off-axis guider or anything like that. I literally can just slap it onto the Red Cat and image with that, and there you go.
Here we go. Okay. So talking about the equipment, it's one of the Instagram questions as well. What are your thoughts about OPTS Raptor 61? Have you came across it before?
Yes. Yep. So I've been looking at that, and of course, the news broke that was coming out like the day after I bought my Red Cat 51, which is very similar, right? They're basically one and the same when it comes down to focal length and whatnot. I think it's similar to, and I forget the name of it right now, but it is similar to an existing telescope that's already out right now. I think the major difference there is it contains already, it's kind of the full package ready to go. It already has like a focal reducer or a flattener, one of the two. And then of course, it's got the rings and everything and a nice focuser. But I feel it's very comparable to the Red Cat 51. I think there's a good amount of, and it honestly just happened recently. Now there's a good amount of variety of nice high quality telescopes at now a lower price range in that focal length. And I think this certainly joins that area of scopes that are already out there now.
Got it. Yeah. So buying a Red Cat, for you, it's $200 at least cheaper than a Raptor, So here
Right.
you go. A little bit
Yes.
of saving
Exactly.
there
Yes.
for the same
Yeah.
quality of yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Red Cat too, it doesn't need a flattener or anything like that. With it, it's already inherently a flat field just because of the design of the optics. So yeah, that's nice too.
Okay, got it. So that's this was a question from Rebula_astrophoto on Instagram. So make sure to follow this man, whoever's watching or listening. And again, my personal question right now is again, buying an equipment, which of course everybody kind of gives their own personal perspective. Somebody else says exactly what you said, buy a DSLR at the beginning and just kind of explore and see if astrophotography is going to be something that you're going to do long term. Because if you're not, at least you're going to have DSLR. Somebody said buy a decent mount, because you will need to make sure that if you're going to continue, that you could build on that mount, so make sure that it's solid. So, it's kind of similar advice that you're giving. And part of that, as you mentioned, is stacking images, which is kind of, a lot of time and effort it takes to get these quality images that you actually can see on Instagram. Yeah. So one of the Instagram, again, your personal, I just want to give out Serious Fritz. So go and check it out. I mean, it's pretty incredible what Fritz did so far. So you're going to see, of course, the observatory and the amazing photographies that he took. So what would you recommend for stacking images? What type of software do you use or maybe used before?
Yeah, so when I first started stacking, I was using CCD Stack. I'm not sure actually where that program is at anymore or how it is, but I've since moved on to PixInsight, which really it's a little expensive, but it is basically the one do-all astrophotography program in terms of imaging processing. It really, if there's anything you need to do to an image, PixInsight can do it. And it has just, incredible algorithms and whatnot that through the stacking process can go that extra mile and make a big difference to what you're getting. So I would definitely recommend, and of course I use it, is PixInsight. I think it does have good constant updates. There's a really good community with it, which is really big, great tutorials all over YouTube. A lot of it can be a little cumbersome or intimidating to start with PixInsight. It certainly was for me even, and it took me a while to get into it, but now there's just such a great, astronomy community around it. So many tutorials set up that you can follow through. It's definitely what I would recommend for stacking and all your image processing, really. I used to be at the point where I would do some stuff in PixInsight, a little bit of stuff in Photoshop, but I've now gotten to the point where now I can just do all of it much better in PixInsight, and that's kind of where I've shifted now.
Got it. So again, for the CCD that you mentioned, so it's now available ccdware.com. And again, by the looks of the website, it doesn't look like they've been doing a lot of kind of updates on a software itself. Maybe they've been doing, I'm not sure. But again, PixInsight, yeah. So that's what a lot of people use. Again, one of the questions that I had before on Instagram, and you kind of answered the first one. Do you think PixInsight software is a viable part of editing? Which is, of course, yes. So, and it says, can you reach the same results with Photoshop as well? Is it going to be similar, same, or different?
So I think the issue with Photoshop just is, and maybe this is just my ignorance, I don't know if you can actually stack images in Photoshop. I'm not sure. Maybe you could get through, maybe you could use some freeware Registacks or something like that to do some initial stacking and then take it to Photoshop. But I think if you started with two of the same, stacked raw images, whatever you stacked it in, you take one into PixInsight, one into Photoshop, I think you're going to get a pretty similar result. It's really all about how good are you at masking, certain images, being able to bring out certain details of things while not, blowing up like star cores or something like that. And both programs do, offer the tools to allow you to get there. I think PixInsight, just because it is geared specifically for astrophotography, has some easier tools in that sense and some quicker workflows that you can do that doesn't take as much, real mastery of the processing software. Like, you need to be pretty good in Photoshop if you're going to get to the level of like what PixInsight could do. But I mean, both programs very powerful for sure.
Here you go. Here we go. So, okay, so that's the answer. So, and again, for people who are wanting to learn about PixInsight, of course, as I mentioned, there is kind of free tutorials on YouTube and of course on social media, and people, like yourself, I'm sure, they can give a few tips and strategies on how to, learn this quicker. And I know like our kind of person that we both know, Michael Collar, he actually wrote a book, the Inside Guide about PixInsight Guide.
Yeah.
And that's available on iBooks as well. So anybody who's listening or watching, you can actually go and download that for free, or maybe it's just a few pounds or something like that, a few dollars. So that's really cool. So again, one of the questions, because I have a few questions here on Instagram, because everybody was looking forward to this interview.
This is great.
Here. So one thing, again, I think this is from a beginner astrophotographer, probably, or somebody who is thinking to get involved. So that person, Planet Gazer _gal asks, what is the one thing that you know that you would wish known when you get started?
That is a really good question. I would say it goes back to, I wish I had known what was the best initial setup to use when getting into astrophotography, because that is really going to, and I think for some people too, it can even be the point where it brings so much frustration if you start with the wrong setup that they kind of leave the hobby, right? You just don't get anything out of it. And I understand that, just from frustration. So I would say just the best thing to do is start with that wide field setup, and you're going to be able to learn all those fundamentals of astronomy while at the same time getting into image acquisition and getting beautiful pictures, kind of from the start, which is really the goal.
Okay, got it. So, okay, so that's the questions covered for today. I'm sure there's a little bit more on Instagram, which of course we have just so much time available here, but look, one thing that I want to ask you, because I know you're involved again in aerospace engineering. So what do you see is going to be happening from a personal view, or kind of being an insider working with these companies, like with the space engineering in general? Because this propulsion system is one of the problems that we're facing with, if you want to travel, then like, let's say to the Mars, because now it's, let's say 6 months plus for us to do that.
Right.
Or if we want to go interstellar, like we need to work on that. So what do you see coming up maybe in the future or now, in aerospace engineering that will kind of give us a boost, maybe in space exploration kind of industries?
Yeah, I think it's going to be kind of a combination of a lot of technologies kind of coming together. And I think one of the great things that has happened recently, though, is there's kind of been this new boom in just the public interest in space and space exploration that is really making it possible to get, a lot of new people into the industry, bringing in people from all sorts of areas, and also just getting, fundamentally the money to start pushing this stuff. And so I think we're going to learn, so much from, like you were saying, the mission to Mars, going back to the moon, all that is going to set us up with a great foundation, a lot of lessons learned. And from there, I think, it's just one thing is going to lead to another. And, we're going to be able to figure out, those hurdles that we've been dealing with, just kind of we come together and kind of get to that focal point. So I think, like we talked about before, it is just a really exciting time with space exploration. And especially here, just living in Central Florida, it seems like every week SpaceX is launching something, and I can just see it in my backyard. It's kind of surreal. It's really, really odd to kind of think about. But I think it's a really exciting future that we've got going on. And I'm just so happy that kind of we're getting back into space exploration, and it's become kind of almost like a popular movement, or it's a really cool thing that people are into, and I think that's great. I think it's going to attract a lot of new people again. I think with that too, like the STEM outreach has been great. Just allowing like a lot of people who before wouldn't have been involved with space exploration, or just the industry in general, are now kind of getting into it. And I think all these big strides that we've already made in just the past, five or so years has a lot to do with that. So I'm really excited to see what happens. I think the next 5 to 10 years is going to be really cool to see.
Good, awesome, and that's very politically correct answer you gave me here, without going into details, for obvious reasons, of course, So no, that is awesome. Thank you again. But you're doing a lot of different great stuff. What's happening with your Instagram page, and you're putting a lot of time. If you're creating your own kind of backyard observatory, and you have that going, that's a commitment. And again, by the looks of the equipment that you have, and you've been involved into this for quite a while, then you're full-time aerospace engineer, you're working, with companies. So that's really cool, So it looks like you're not gonna go away, So on that note, what is your personal legacy that you want to leave behind you?
Oh man, that's a great question. Yeah, I think I want to have kind of a hand in this new exploration, or all this new engineering technology, somehow leave my mark one way or another, just whether being involved, being there. But then with astronomy, I think it really comes down to, I certainly love the process, I love the photos, but really just being able to pass that on to other people, it feels so good. And I think that alone would be, just like a great legacy to have. just knowing that, I've helped or had some small part in getting other people involved in this hobby that I just love so much.
Exactly. So I appreciate you so much again for today, for coming over, because I was waiting. So I was so excited about this interview, because I know like what you've been doing, like when it comes to personal work and stuff like that. So it's really awesome. It's really awesome. What you're doing, and I love the fact that you're just looking to inspire people at the same time, because yourself, that's how projects get defunded or funded, by bringing more kind of people's attention to what's happening.
Right.
And with the space shuttle program, that's why it shut down from government funding, because people didn't pay attention to that anymore.
Yep.
So that's why we need more people, again, just like you who are watching or listening to this episode, to get involved with it. And again, Fritz gave so many different great advice, tools, and strategies how we can get started. And sometimes it could be pricey, but there's always, the thing here is just to get started. Maybe it's just liking, commenting, or reading, or going and watching, SpaceX crew launching live. Which, by the way, this interview, when it will be coming out, they already be there, on ISS. But just get involved somewhere. But space photography, astrophotography is definitely a great place. So Fritz, again, just want to say big thank you again for coming over today and sharing all these great, valuable tips. I really appreciate it.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So guys and girls, before we're gonna go, one thing that I want to ask you: if you shared this episode with a friend of yours who maybe had some thoughts about starting something in space industries, space exploration, or they're looking for these tips and strategies on how to become a great astrophotographer. So I think I don't think I know this episode will be really valuable for that person. So make sure to pass this along. And again, Fritz, thank you so much for coming over. And as always, I'll see you next time. And don't forget, keep exploring.